Gaziantep, Kilis, tüm bu bölgelere yapılan bu tür saldırılar artık son burada noktalanması lazım.
On August 24th last year, Turkey launched Operation Euphrates Shield in northern Syria. Now, the aim of this operation was to maintain Turkey's border security as well as confront the terrorism threat posed by both Daesh as well as the YPG. Hello and welcome to TRT World's half-hour special program that will focus on the lives of the people on both sides of the border. Over the next half hour, we'll be bringing you in-depth coverage. We'll be live with Edis Tianshan in northern Syria from Jarabulus, as well as with our Middle East correspondent, Yola Abdavid, who's at Gaziantep's biggest refugee camp in Nizip. Gentlemen, thank you for now. We'll be coming to you in just a bit later on in the program. And with me now here in Antep is Muzaffer Şenel. He's the director of the Center for Modern Turkish Studies with Istanbul's Şehir University. And throughout this special coverage, he'll be helping us understand the significance of this military operation, what it meant for Turkey, how it's changing the landscape of Syria's civil war. But first, let's take a closer look at what the military operation has achieved.
Turkey launched a military offensive on August 24, 2016 to secure its border. Ankara sent troops, tanks and warplanes to support the Free Syrian Army. Operation Euphrates Shield aimed to push Daesh away and to stop YPG militants. Turkey sees the YPG as an extension of the PKK terror group, which has been fighting the Turkish state for the last 40 years. It fears the YPG is trying to carve out a self-governing territory in North Syria, similar to Iraq's autonomous Kurdish region. Under the cross-border operation, Turkish troops and the FSA took the town of Jarabulus on the Euphrates River. It was under Daesh control for 2 years. They cleared Daesh from a 100-kilometer stretch of the border. The troops went further south, clearing additional towns, including Al-Rai and Darbek. In February 2017, they took control of Al-Bab after suffering its most severe losses. By the end of March, Turkey ended this operation in Syria, declaring the offensive a success. Turkish troops are still stationed in the secured regions and along the border, and the Turkish government has suggested there might be more cross-border campaigns to come.
I want to bring in Muzaffer Şenel, our guest here in Gaziantep. Muzaffer, now when the Syrian civil war started, Turkey's position was always against the Assad regime. That was its #1 objective, to get Bashar al-Assad out of power. But when you look at this operation, it didn't intervene in Syria because of that. Why did Turkey intervene in northern Syria?
We will speak about the three reasons. The first one is to prevent border violations arising from the region, especially because of the acts of the Syrian regimes that unable and unwillingly didn't do anything to stop these violations, which is arising from the region, and to eliminate the Daesh and also the PYD and PKK-related YPG's terrorist acts towards Turkey. And the third one is speaking about to create a safer area for the people who lives in that area and to create let's say, buffer zone for Turkish security borders, the Turkish borders.
So violation, repel Daesh, as well as create a safer zone. Muzaffer, please hang on with me. Let's watch our first package. Now, before the operation, Euphrates Shield, the Turkish town of Kilis was one of the worst affected by Daesh's presence on the Turkish-Syrian border. War had literally become the soundtrack to life, and sometimes the town became caught up in the conflict, with Daesh targeting it with Katyusha rockets. Our correspondent Francis Collings was there back in March of last year, where he witnessed the attack firsthand.
It's a difficult time for Selahattin Arslan, coping with the loss of his 14-year-old son Emre. A year ago, he went to buy bread from the local shop. It was the last time Selahattin saw him alive. A rocket fired from Daesh-held areas of Syria landed near their former home. Emre was hit by shrapnel, injuries that proved fatal.
We moved to another place because the old one has memories of my son everywhere. He grew up in that house, and wherever we looked, we were seeing him. There are memories in every room and with every piece of furniture.
He's just one of many people here whose lives have been devastated. For a 10-month period last year, Kilis was targeted directly. 95 rockets were fired from Syria, killing 25 people. It was a campaign designed to terrify.
We had psychological problems. Our children and wives were panicking at the sound of closing doors, whether or not it was a bomb. But by the end, the state has done its duty and protected its people, even though it happened late. Now we are out of the reach of one terror group, and we are secure.
The random nature of these sudden deadly attacks is something we saw at first hand. In March last year, on a clear spring day, myself and a film crew were nearby when we heard that a missile had landed.
We arrived at this location a few minutes afterwards. 2 rockets had just come down. The local authorities were here. They were doing their best to try and secure the area, but there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of anger from residents that their town had been hit once again. But while we were live on air reporting, another attack came in. The ambulances were here very, very quick and then rushed away. Things have abated slightly. It's calmed down. There's less shouting and there's less police pushing people back. Okay. If you can still hear us, that's another missile that has just landed about 200 yards away from us.
In total, 8 rockets hit Kilis that day, killing 2 people. 3 of the rockets landed in the Kazim Karabakir neighborhood where we were. Many here believe they weren't being defended. That changed with the start of Operation Euphrates Shield a year ago. Coordinated out of a military headquarters in Kilis. By October last year, the attacks on the town had ceased. These days, Kilis appears once again to be a calm place, as locals and Syrian refugees alike go about their business. But the people here are wary, knowing that until the conflict in Syria has completely ended, life in this border town will remain highly unpredictable and could once again turn deadly. Francis Collins, TRT World, in Kilis on the Turkey-Syria border.
A great story there by our correspondent Francis Collins. Muzaffar, let's turn back to you. When you look at Operation Euphrates Shield, how do you think the military operation has sort of changed the lives or affected the lives of the people of the region on both sides of the border? Let's start with Turkey.
Yeah, positively it impacts in terms of providing a safe area for the borderlands people who lives nearby the border, and then especially they didn't hear anymore to the bombings, and also it creates a kind of the security zone for all those people. And the refugees is also returning back to for example, every day around 150 people is returning back to the Jarabulus. Why people are returning back to let's say, the freed or liberated areas from the Daesh? The Turkey is providing over there social security services, building the hospitals, schools, and also establishing the security forces, like more than 200 police forces that trained by Turkey, and the city councils were established, and muhtars, and also these local authorities are trying to be more strengthened. It creates a safer area for them. This is the first time for Jarabulus people. If you speak with the Jarabulus people, we see that their happiness in terms of because they didn't have anything during the Assad regime time, and with the Turkish operation and after the Turkish intervention, what Turkey is trying to create a kind of social services which created more safe area for the people. Therefore, the positively impact on the everyday lives of the people.
Okay, Muzaffar, let's put a pause on it for a second. Let's actually talk about Jarabulus. The northern Syrian town of Jarabulus became the first liberated from Daesh. Since then, people have been returning back to the area to rebuild their lives. But the reality is, it's also left deep scars. On the western banks of the Euphrates River is a town rising from its ashes. New buildings are going up on almost every street of Jarabulus, in stark contrast to other parts of Syria where they're being destroyed. It's a construction boom in a war-torn country. The population here has increased tenfold since rebel fighters, backed by Turkish forces, captured the town from Daesh 1 year ago. But while the town is quickly recovering from its physical damage, some residents still carry the emotional scars inflicted by the terror group. Fawaz wasn't silent about his opposition to Daesh's rule. He said he'd celebrate like it was his birthday the day its fighters left. Those words came with a hefty price. He was imprisoned for 90 days.
They knocked on my door, covered my face, and put a gun to my head, and then they brought me here. They tied me up and hung me from the ceiling and keep beating me until I was unconscious. This lasted for 3 months.
1 year later, Fawaz is able to enjoy the feeling of freedom and security. Jarabulus was the first town liberated in Turkey's Operation Euphrates Shield. It was launched to secure part of northern Syria near the Turkish border and to create a safe zone. While Jarabulus may be one of the safest towns in Syria, there's still an ongoing civil war in most parts of the country. And security here is an extremely important matter. Behind this wall are the town's most vital institutions, like the police headquarters, military command, local council, as well as the region's only hospital. Daesh once used it as a prison, but this building now provides a full range of medical care. Most of the patients initially coming into its emergency room had war injuries. Now its doctors treat problems seen at any regular hospital. But now and then, they still deal with injuries that are a result of the terror left behind.
How did you get injured?
I was injured when I went out looking for land to farm. When I was looking, a mine went off.
The liberation of Jarabulus has meant more and more Syrians are coming here in search of a better life.
Because Jarabulus is a safe region, we are beginning to see some difficulties arise from the high number of displaced people who are coming here. There's population pressure on the city.
Old residents are returning. Newcomers are also being drawn to the city. Jarabulus might be struggling to cope, but its people bring with them the muscle to rebuild and the hope that peace brings prosperity. Let's cross now to TRT World's Edis Tianchan, who's actually in Jarabulus in northern Syria. Edis, now you were the first international correspondent to enter the town after it was liberated. Just explain to us, our viewers, what that experience was like. It must have been amazing.
Alijan, it's safe to say that it was by far one of the most emotional experiences I've had inside Syria and many other places, I should say. When we first arrived in Jarabulus, only a few days after its liberation, we were tagged along with one of the first humanitarian aid convoys. And the scene we witnessed upon our arrival, it was absolutely tragic. I mean, these people, the residents of Jarabulus, had nothing. I mean, their businesses were shut down. There were no schools or hospitals. They didn't have any money and they didn't even have food. And these people were left to starve, and they were traumatized under 17 months long Daesh rule. They were forced to witness even beheadings every week in the central square. So when we first arrived, hundreds of women and children were gathered at that central square in Jarabulus, holding their pots and containers, just try to get their first home-cooked meal and medicine, much needed basic necessities they were deprived from for a long while. So it was very, very emotional. And I should say also today, marking the first year year of the Operation Euphrates Shield has been quite emotional because there's been celebrations out in the street, there's been musical performances and sketches, and really the people of Jarabulus finally are getting some sense of normalcy in their lives. But don't forget that this is still a war zone, and the military personnel here is still preparing for their next move. There's been now local authorities established here, a city council, as well as the local police. So in our next exclusive report from Jarabulus, let's take a look at the security situation here.
A year after Jarabulus was liberated from Daesh, life is returned to normal. People can walk freely and shops have reopened. The newly formed Free Syrian Police Force is patrolling the streets. It's also checking who is coming in and out of town. There's always fear that terror cells might be hiding here. And the growing population of Jarabulus has also brought new concerns.
New crimes have started to appear in our society because there are people from different regions mixed with each other. Weapons are everywhere in this phase of the Syrian revolution. The police cannot carry out their job completely. We hope that we can build partnership with different segments of society.
Ra'ad Hamad has 400 men under his command, and he will soon have dozens more as the Free Syrian Police have launched a recruitment campaign. But keeping the area safe is not easy in a place when there's no official state and no official army.
After driving Daesh out, these FSA fighters are in charge of Jarabulus once again. But sporadic fighting is still going on right on the outskirts of Jarabulus, and all factions are involved in battles on several other fronts all around the Euphrates Shield area.
The Syrian revolution has descended into a multifaceted war with many enemies and little prospect for peace.
We will fight Daesh forces, PKK forces and regime forces.
The dozens of factions that make up the Free Syrian Army have united under one flag, but coordination among them hasn't always been easy.
FSA factions in the Euphrates Shield area are cooperating as 3 different groups, and our goal now is to unite them into a single united army. And it's true that there are some challenges, but there's been progress in eliminating some of the infiltrations.
After more than 6 years of conflict, young people here know nothing else but war. Noor Mohammed's son was injured 4 times while fighting with the FSA, and she's worried about the future of the next generation.
Children are picking up sticks, saying, "I will kill you, you will die." That's how they play. We need to change their mindset.
Daesh's rule of terror is over in Jarabulus, and the town is rebuilding itself. But with war still going on not that far away, most of the people here hope this peace is not just a pause in a seemingly never-ending fight.
Once the FSA factions consolidated their power here in Jarabulus, they moved on to capture more ground. And the ultimate trophy of the Operation Euphrates Shield was the strategic town of Al-Bab. Remember, that was the last remaining stronghold of Daesh in the northern Aleppo province of Syria. But once they repelled Daesh also from Al-Bab, now they've managed to secure the entire Turkish-Syrian border area from Daesh elements. But they feel even that might just not be enough, because they constantly feel the threat of also the YPG and Assad regime forces on multiple fronts.
All right, TRT World, it is Tianshan live for us in Jarabulus in northern Syria. Thank you for that excellent reporting. Now, while Jarabulus was an important milestone, as Idis was mentioning, the battle for Al-Bab, further south in that, was another key turning point in the fight against Daesh. Now, the town sits just 25 kilometers from the Turkish border and was a key supply route for Syria's largest city of Aleppo. Daesh held it for almost 3 years when Turkish-backed forces decided to push towards the town. And after a 3-month, 90-day battle, they were able to capture the city center following days of fierce fighting. Turkey declared victory there in late February of this year, And Al-Bab's capture by Turkish military forces was a loss to the YPG. The PKK-linked terror group could not unite the territory that they held on both sides of the town, south of the town. Now, I want to bring in Muzaffar Shenal once again and actually talk about the significance of Al-Bab. In terms of Turkey's national security, how important was it that these so-called Kurdish corridor between Afrin in the west and Kobani in the east didn't actually have a physical connection?
There is no physical connection between Afrin and the Kobani. If these Al-Bab and all those areas will be controlled by the PKK-linked the YPG group, YPG and the other terrorist groups, that which lead us to a kind of Turkey will be surrounded by the PKK-linked the terrorist organizations, YPG and their corridors. It will also creating a pogrom, I mean that the forced migration to the people, that the Turkomans and Arabs and the other ethnic groups living in those areas is forcing by the YPG to go to the other places, like coming to Turkey or going to the south, which create another refugee flows, which will be another most important for Turkey. It will prevent if this area, which is not controlled by, it is important this area, which is to access to the Middle East, if it's controlled by the PKK-linked terrorist groups, which Turkey will not easily access to the southern Middle East.
All right, Muzaffar Shenal, thank you for joining us here on our special coverage. I'm going to ask you to stick around for just a little bit. He was mentioning the refugee crisis. Well, without a doubt, one of the most unfortunate byproducts of war are the people being displaced. Turkey's government says almost 3 million Syrians have settled into the country during the past 6 years as a result of the war in Syria. Our Middle East correspondent, Yola Abdavid, joins me now from Nizip, from one of the largest refugee camps in Gaziantep. Yola, we've been discussing the creation of this safe zone in northern Syria. Talking to Syrian refugees there, what sense are you getting from them in terms of their desire to go back to their homeland?
There's 4,000 refugees here, and many would say that if they can, if it's safe, less danger, no fighting, they would return as soon as possible to their homeland. They would do that if there's education for their children, if there's food and there's security. Now, we've been watching at the border near Karkamish and that crossing point to Jarabulus over the last few days, and we've seen a few dozen people returning, but only to areas where it's safe. Not just in the Operation Euphrates Shield area, but also further west. But the dilemma is, when do they go and how many of them can go into safe areas?
The 9 members of the Hekel family live here in 4 rooms in the border town of Kilis. They left Aleppo in 2012. Fear forced them out. One of the sons works in a bakery, and his $30 per week pay helps sustain the whole family. Their application for refugee aid support has been refused 3 times.
We hope to go back to Syria when safe zones are established and when the regime is replaced by another one. Most Syrians will return because it's our country, our homeland, where we were born and raised. Here, we face financial troubles and we live in a different way.
There are 110,000 Syrians in Kilis, more than local Turks, and unlike Mahmoud, many are choosing to stay.
Here, at the border crossing point to the town of Jarabulus, some Syrians are venturing back, mostly to areas where there's no fighting and only some danger. And that's because Operation Euphrates Shield has cleared Daesh fighters and the YPG from one Syrian territory. But of course, there's still uncertainty in other parts of Syria.
When exit papers are rechecked, a few families at a time are allowed to leave Turkey. Their belongings follow them into Syria. According to an aid organization which helps people in Syria, another wave of refugees is possible.
We talk about the 3 million refugees here, but what about the 7 million people who live in the conflict area? We support them to in the all kind of need assessment, all kind of humanitarian aid.
Gaziantep is a bustling manufacturing city, and there are opportunities here. Dania and her husband have opened a nursery for children under 5 years old.
Many of my friends were looking for a safe place to take care of their children during work hours. So we started this project, and it's a place to teach children and let them have fun by giving them education and activities.
Her husband, Ahmad, has work but also helps out here, both trained as engineers. He agrees with his wife. Their future isn't in Syria.
For us, it was like a final decision to stay in Turkey because it's unclear vision now. It's a fuzzy vision, the situation in Syria. I give them the tool, the education, the security, and they will have the decision later on about their own life.
Kilis, like many border towns, is being changed by the refugees arriving here. But for those, like Mahmoud, it's temporary. One day they hope to return to start a new life in their homeland.
And that is the dilemma, pure and simple. What do these people do? Up to 3 million of them in Turkey, 1 million in Lebanon, and of course almost 1 million in Jordan, all the neighboring countries where the majority of Syrians have fled to escape the war in their own country. And remember, 12 million people, according to the United Nations, are displaced out of 23 million of population before the war started. Now, there could be even more refugees if there is an increase and an upscale in fighting in different parts of Syria. Not just in Raqqa, where we're seeing a lot of fighting at the moment, but also in provinces where the fighting hasn't even escalated yet. And according to one Syrian refugee organization which helps people in Syria, there are 6 to 7 million Syrians who do not depend on the al-Assad regime, and potentially they are refugees of the future. So before we can actually talk about people returning en masse to Syria, there is so much potential in terms of other people trying to flee. And they're fleeing for those 3 reasons: security, for their education for their children, and of course, normal life and food. Alichan.
All right, TRT World's Yolap David live for us in Nizib. Well, that wraps up our special coverage looking back on Operation Euphrates Shield. I'd like to thank our guest, Muzaffar Shanel, for joining us here, as well as our viewers for tuning in. We're going to leave you now with some iconic images from the operation, as well as life in the area since. Thank you, and goodbye from Gaziantep.